Hi friends, if you're like me, you're really excited about all the artificial intelligence happening in the photo world, but what you really want is a machine that tells you what you want for dinner tonight. Or you're a photographer that wants to talk about autofocus. That sounds like you, we should talk. I am excited because today we are going to be talking about all of the settings that I have for autofocus, which is great because I've literally done mentor sessions. Specifically, somebody has came over with their camera just for us to set up what their autofocus settings are. I'm going to do that for you here today and save you guys from having to come over and be kiss attacked by my dog. So let's do it. In this video, I will be talking about camera settings. So if your camera is not with you right now, feel free to pause the video, go grab your EOS R6 or EOS R or Mark IV, and let's go through some settings on our camera together. So I'm going to be setting things up with my EOS R. So to start with, I am going to start in the autofocus category. I typically shoot in servo autofocus, which is where it does tracking, and I do tend to use autofocus where it does face tracking. I don't even have all these other guys turned on. I really only use face tracking and servo. Subject to detect people. It really depends on what I'm shooting. I've been shooting a lot of families without pets, so I had it set to people, but you can also do no priority. But if you are shooting specifically pets, or if you have one picture that you really want to get with a dog in it, it's going to prioritize people, I found, more often than not. So you're going to want to know that that's an option for you to go in there and change. Eye detection, I always have that turned on. Continuous autofocus, I typically don't have this turned on. I know Sam uses it whenever he uses flash. It's not something that I do. Don't need to touch on movie. Manual focus peaking, I have that on red. This is only something that I really use if I'm using the tilt shift. So manual focus peaking, won't get into because we're talking about autofocus today. I tend to not use my focus guide. It really doesn't matter if the focus beam firing is turned on or off. It almost never triggers. So most of these are actually set to their default settings, and I even have this set up in auto. In this menu, the only thing that I've really changed is lens drive when autofocus is impossible. I want it to go on. It kills me when lenses just keep focusing, but it's more annoying for it to not try at all because that means it's never going to find focus. So I do keep continuous focus search on, and I do limit my autofocus methods because I never use expand AF area, zone AF, large zone AF. These are things that I don't use. The only two things that I have turned on are spot AF and face tracking, and the other one's just on by default. And the last menu for autofocus is the initial servo point. I do have it set up so that I can choose one, but I'm using face tracking for all of this. So I am making sure that I'm using the face tracking. And the other place where I've made adjustments are the sensitivity. So the autofocus point select, I do have it set so it is a little bit more sensitive. So the only two modes that I really use are one-shot autofocus and servo autofocus. And the difference between one-shot and servo is that in servo, it's going to track no matter whether or not my subject is coming close to me or moving further away. Servo is great if things are moving towards you or if they're moving across the screen because it's really going to stay on focus. One shot is great for any time where I'm shooting, say anybody that's like hiding in a bush and they're like slightly obscured for something. It's really going to be able to hone in on where eyes are and faces are without me having to necessarily select where that point is. I feel like servo sometimes won't always necessarily pick the thing I want, and one shot tends to hone in on finding eyes and faces just a little bit easier. And the way that I'm switching back and forth between those is because I have my set button set up to toggle between autofocus servo and autofocus one shot. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the menu. That is going to be under Customize Custom Buttons, and you can use any button that you want for this, but I have it set to my set button in the middle. So it's right here. You go into set and you choose whichever one you want, and mine is one shot to servo. That way, as I'm shooting things, all I have to do is hit the set button and it toggles back and forth between one shot and servo. One shot is something that I use almost always if my clients are standing still. It's something that I'm exclusively using whenever I'm doing family pictures or whenever I'm really trying to focus in on a singular eyeball and people aren't moving. So servo is anytime people are moving, and one shot for me is whenever people are standing still. And when you're in autofocus servo, whenever you have that primary point that you can choose from, you can use this to toggle around your entire screen to find whatever it is that you're looking for. In one picture, my subject is off on this side, so I move my button over here so that way it's more likely to grab the eyeball or the face of the person that's over on this side. If I then want to shoot somebody on the left side of my screen, instead of just moving everything all the way over there, even though that only takes a second, I just have my middle button set up so that whenever I push it in the middle, it's automatically going to just go back to the middle. But admittedly, I'm constantly putting it in the middle and then moving my focal point up here so that I'm more likely to frame my subjects so that their heads are in that top 1/3. And I have a whole video where I'm talking about composition, but putting my point in the middle and then moving it up to that 1/3 right there, I am subconsciously sending myself a message to take better compositions. So I'm constantly putting my button in the middle and then moving it up just on that 1/3 line. So that way I'm thinking about my composition. I also wanted to talk about autofocus whenever I'm using flash. So I'm gonna pull up a reception picture. I have shared how I've used bounce flash in another video, but I am gonna go ahead and share with you what my autofocus looks like during reception pictures, specifically dance pictures. So for dance pictures, even though people are moving, I typically am not shooting in servo. I am typically shooting in one-shot AF. And this is just because it finds people's faces, and I'm taking like 10 pictures of every single dance shot that I'm shooting anyway. So in theory, one of them is gonna be in focus. And I'm not using back button focus, I'm just using my shutter release. So I'm just constantly hitting this button as I'm shooting on the dance floor, and whenever I'm ready, I'm taking those photos. The other thing that I really love about one shot is if you do have multiple people in the pictures and you're in one shot, it'll show you that it's on one person's eye, but using this little toggle going back and forth, you can choose which person you want to put it on, which is pretty cool because it does tend to prioritize the person that's directly in front of the camera, but you can pick anybody in the picture whose eyes it recognizes. And the last little tip that I have is that I tend to shoot things like details and objects in servo mode. They're not moving, but I'm moving. I'm constantly trying to make sure that my composition is correct. And I feel like it doesn't work as well in one-shot AF. So I'm gonna put in one-shot AF, and it's gonna focus on the Mod Podge, and that's fine. But when I put it in servo mode and I move my point over, I'm able to select and move and get close, and it's just gonna mainly be where I want it to be in track, and then I can also do it with the object behind it. And I just find that a little bit easier than one shot. It's one situation where even when they're still, I'm moving. Outside of autofocus, I did want to share with you a little tip to make sure that things are in focus. If you find that you are having motion blur throughout the day, if you are constantly going down to like a 60th of a second and regretting it because you're getting camera blur or motion blur as a result, one thing that I have set up in my menu that is a little bit different, that's unrelated to autofocus, but I have to tell you somewhere, is that I limit my shutter speed range. And I have put this in my special menu because you can program your own menus in Canon cameras. And I usually set my shutter speed range to about 2/50th of a second for most of the day. And during reception pictures, that's when I'll drop it down to like a 60th of a second whenever I've got the flash on and I know that I'm gonna be able to compensate for some of that blur. If it's something you're interested in trying, if it's something that you tend to do, making your shutter speed way too low and regretting it later, it's under the camera settings menu in the second area, and you just go to set shutter speed range and you can change it there. So those are my autofocus settings. Whether people are moving at me or staying still, whether I'm trying to shoot through something, pets or people, how I shoot multiple people, shooting dance floor photos, to objects, to details, to photos where I'm using flash. I really hope this was helpful. If you have any questions at all, definitely let me know and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Let's see. Oh God. Do I have multiple people in any of my pictures? Where are my friends?